Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Glad Trad podcast. I'm Jordan Pacheco.
And I'm Rodolfo Carlos.
And because he couldn't say no, because we made him sign a lucrative contract, we have once again Charles Coulombe, all the way from Vienna, Austria. Hello, sir. Hello, sir.
Thank you. It's great to be back in the land of the free and the home of the brave.
That's what they tell us.
This is great because I can enjoy my native land without the burnings and the build up to the election and all that stuff. Now, just by seeing you two.
Just you wait, Charles.
See, the problem is that you're missing all the fun. I mean, you're in the seat of what was once the Holy Roman Empire. If you wanted a place of awesome politicking, crazy stories, and a ridiculous history, don't come to America. You go where you're at.
But that was then. This is now.
Oh, yes. How would you describe Austria? You know, every country has a sort of kind of a heritage vibe. You know what I mean? Like, yeah. Americans view themselves in a way. Austria's had such a lucrative history. Is there still kind of a respect for the Holy Roman Empire, the Austrian Empire? What do you kind of find?
There's a weird kind of dichotomy because there's a great awareness that everything worthwhile here came from the Habsburgs. There's no question about that. But that breeds kind of a weird feeling on the part of a lot of the political class. You know, and the media. They're kind of like resentful teenagers who don't mind spending daddy's money. They don't mind living in daddy's house, but they're constantly talking daddy down. You know, which you can't have it both ways. I mean, this was really summed up to me 10 years ago when I was here. There was a big sign on the Hofburg saying, "Sorry, we have no emperors, only their jewels." Which is like saying, "Hi, we're thieves."
Naturally.
Yeah, I mean, so there's that element of it. But by and large, I mean, they're very, you'll see Kaiserschmarrn on the dessert on every menu. There are double eagles all over the place. I mean, and of course, too, the faith, although it's far from healthy here, it's very much a part of everything. So Corpus Christi processions are a big deal. May crownings, the Epiphany. I mean, and what's coming up now, All Saints and All Souls, the cemeteries will be packed and filled with people lighting candles at night. The cemeteries here at night are incredible. In All Saints and All Souls.
It seems to me that Austria is kind of in a funny place because I see a lot of there are some good Austrian bishops. There are a lot of good Austrian Catholics, and there's a lot of reclamation people I see online. But then on contrast, right, I see stories out of like some of the worst cathedrals, these art galleries and the homo heresy that's going on and everything.
Yeah, let's put it this way. We Americans tend to specialize in a sort of happy mediocrity. But here, as in France, there's really, really good and there's really, really bad. And what's really, really good, you'd be hard to find better. And what's really, really bad, you'd be hard to find worse. Whereas with us Americans, we tend to prefer the big, soft, gooey, gushy middle. Like a big cosmic marshmallow.
Speaking of, so I'm sure at some point we'll hit Austrian Catholicism properly, but as per today's kind of theme, you're a California native, and so is Rudy. And I'm back here in Colorado, where I belong on the high plains. Oh. And what's funny about the contrast between the two places is that California is a very Catholicism just kind of weaved into the cobblestones, it seems to me. Like, you can't go a corner in Los Angeles in particular without stumbling across an old church, you can't talk about California without the mission systems, St. Junipero Serra. Meanwhile, here in Colorado, at least, it's a very, it took the immigrant wave to kind of bring about our sorts of churches. So our history really only is 120 years ago. Yeah. So I was wondering if you would just kind of give us an overview of what Catholicism is to California, as easy as that is.
Yeah, I mean, it's not that hard. I mean, where you are actually, what really brought the first Catholics out were mining. They were minors. I suppose the easiest way to put it is that the missions were the start of California. They were the whole reason for it being. Reason being that King Carlos III of Spain was afraid of the Russians coming down from Alaska and snagging California. So he thought he'd beat him to it, and he did. But he wanted to colonize on the cheap. So he commissioned Father Serra to establish a line of missions, which he did. Granted land to anyone who, soldiers and people like that who came along for the ride. And then basically let the thing grow on its own. There were 4 presidios of troops, Santa Barbara, San Diego, Monterey, and San Francisco. So the missions, the 2 towns that were founded, San Jose and LA, which were small, dusty pueblos, and the ranchos, their rancheros and their adobe houses. That was Spanish California. That was it. That was all there was. But they managed to establish a very pleasant way of life. It really didn't last all that long. I mean, you consider 1769 was the first settlement. 1821, it becomes 1821. It becomes Mexican. Mexico becomes independent, and then in 1845, it becomes American. So we're not really talking about a long period. Someone born in 1769 in San Diego could very easily have lived to see the Americans come. So Spanish California, although it's really established itself on our collective memory, we think of the missions, we think of the fandangos at the ranchos, and the free living life in the California vaquero. It didn't last very long. And there weren't that many people in California. There were the Indians, there were the settlers, there just weren't many of them. But then California was annexed by the United States. First couple of years, nothing happened much. Then you had the gold rush. And Northern California filled up with people from all over the world. And that was the beginning, in a certain sense, of the modern church, the American church. A lot of Irish came to San Francisco and the mining country, and established churches very like the East Coast of the United States. And a lot of non-Catholics came rushing in. And after the American Civil War, the Second Civil War, as you might call it, when they established the Transcontinental Railroad, people poured in from the East, mostly Protestant, some Catholic. And certain cities in California were very Catholic. San Francisco, prior to World War II, was very, very Catholic. Irish, Italians, Portuguese, French. LA was not so much. LA was actually a very Protestant town.
Really?
From about 1870 till after World War II. We had Catholics, of course, but we also did not have the large number of Hispanics that we think of today. We think of California as a Hispanic state. That's relatively recent. The origins were Hispanic, but this huge mob of people from the East kind of drowned that the way they did the French influence in the Midwest. So for a while, the church was very Anglo, very politically well placed, but definitely having to fight a lot of anti-Catholic influences. Ku Klux Klan was strong in Southern California in the 20s.
The KKK had apparently their strongest base was here in Denver during the 20s. But it's kind of crazy that, you only think of them south, kind of moving north and our way. I would never guess west like that.
Oh, yes. And in the north, I knew a fellow whose dad had been a Klansman in Michigan.
Mm-hmm.
And he taught me this little rhyme, which I don't mind reciting to you. So it goes, I'd rather be a clansman in robes of snowy white than be a Roman Catholic in robes as black as night. For a clansman is an American, and America is his home. But a Catholic owes allegiance to the Dago Pope of Rome. Ain't that elegant?
I don't know. That sounds pretty nice to me, you know.
I wish we were that cool still, honestly. Like, I don't know if they've ever seen Father Bob Rainbow Stole anytime recently, but
no, I'm afraid we lack a certain countercultural cachet these days.
I like the old illustrations, anti-Catholic illustrations that were around back in the day.
Oh yeah,
There's
Thomas Nast and Puck and all that.
Yeah, the shadow of Rome coming into the classroom. I'm like, I don't know. That sounds pretty base to me.
So it would look good, you know. Every Catholic church had guns stored in its basement. That's what people said.
Just was it common for churches to be raided kind of in that time, up to the 20s and everything?
No, not really. Not that I know of. Maybe in some places. I don't know. I do know though the big joke that when Al Smith was defeated in the election of 1928, it was claimed that he sent a one-word telegram to the Pope in Rome: unpack.
So you talked earlier in terms of how California and Catholicism work, that it was Anglo, but of course Los Angeles was Protestant. And is that because of the gold rush that brought that kind of thing over?
No. The gold rush came to the north. What brought the Protestants to the south was the railroad, the weather, and then eventually the film industry.
I've always thought that the film industry, but it seems like the early film industry had a lot of Catholic elements, though. So
it did. It had a lot of Jews too, but it brought a lot of Protestants out. And of course, what was interesting about the Protestants who came out is that their connections to their denominations were very, shall we say, loose. And this had been the case going back now to the after the Civil War. And so, starting in about the 1880s, Southern California became the breeding ground of weird cults, which that particular American pastime originally had been centered in New England amongst the Yankees. So, you know, we got, even in colonial times, you had the Shakers and you had the New Light cult of Shadrach, Ireland, all sorts of bizarre religions and cults popping out of it. Transcendentalism and Unitarianism and Universalism, Mormonism, in fact, Christian Science, just all sorts of freaky stuff. But then the center of religious alternativeness shifted to the Midwest. And there it sat in the Chicago area for about 20 years, and then moved out to the big nowhere, to LA. And I'm happy to say it's been with us ever since.
Yeah. Well, that's
what? You got something against ascended masters, Lemurians, UFOs? What is wrong with you?
This is all describing Los Angeles, hotbed of Scientology. There's West Hollywood. There's
yes. Theosophy came early on, spiritualism, the great I am, mankind united, holy super light. Oh, golly Moses.
There was a man that I met once. This was probably around 10 years ago. I met him at Barnes & Noble, and he told me he was a Rosicrucian and that I had been reborn, I don't know, 75 times or something like that.
Doubtless he was, I'm sure. And mind you, we have not one, not two, but 3 different varieties of Rosicrucians. Yes. And all of it in the heady air of California. Now, this was to a great degree. I mean, you'd find a few Catholics and Jews who go for this kind of thing. But basically, it was amongst WASPs that this sort of thing really, really took hold. But we did, in the Protestant world, we managed to come up with a few firsts. What's his face? Reverend Schuler in Orange County, the Dutch Reformed minister. He started the first drive-in church.
Ooh.
And that eventually morphed into what became known as the Crystal Cathedral.
Whoa, no way. Which is now Christ Cathedral.
Yes, indeed.
It made more sense for the Diocese of Orange to buy and renovate that thing than, build a St. Vibiana's.
Well, they wouldn't have been able to build St. Vibiana's, but you see, the thing is, Orange County has always kind of been number 2 to LA. They're like Avis to Hearst. They're number 2, so they try harder. In LA, we built the ugliest cathedral known to man. So Orange County had to try to match us somehow. And they realized that building something, the cathedral cost $28 million or something. It was expensive. $78 million. Anyway, it was very expensive. So the Diocese of Orange decided they'd compete by buying something pre-made to compete in the ugly sweepstakes. I still think we beat them, though. I think they're still number 2. I don't think the Crystal Cathedral is uglier than our cathedral.
This brings us to a really good segue because, Rudy and I both are fortunate in the way that we're young guys, which means that we haven't seen the whole of changes and everything. But one thing that's interesting is that Los Angeles has, I think, some of the most pretty churches in the Union, certainly out west.
No.
Blessed Sacrament, right, which is the Jesuit hotbed. Vibiana's was pretty before it became an event space. Charles Borromeo. There are so many. St. Vincent de Paul.
St. Vincent de Paul, St. Immaculate Conception, Sacred Heart. Down in Long Beach, you've got St. Anthony, which is amazing. St. Andrews, Pasadena, Christ the King. Yeah, it's a never-ending. Because those churches were primarily built under Archbishop Cantwell and Cardinal McIntyre. And just as the Protestants exploded after World War I in numbers, so did Catholics in the East. And that was basically 1918 to 1959 was the golden age of church building, Catholic church building in Los Angeles.
That seems to echo a lot of Denver's too. Our churches are early 1900s, and we have the Cathedral Basilica of the Immaculate Conception. There's Our Lady of Mount Carmel, not the fraternity one, but there's another one that was built by Polish immigrants. Red brick, very, very pretty. So, we see, you talked a little earlier, the strains that come from the WASP, which is kind of the culty side of California.
Yeah.
It seems to me that Anglo-Catholicism in the past 50, 60 years has led to agnosticism in the Church of Nice. But it seems like you talked about the influx of Hispanic Catholicism.
Yeah.
And I know that a little bit from New Mexico, but it seems to me like that leads a little bit, like I've seen an Aztec procession into, not the Church of the Immaculate Conception. What's the very first church in Los Angeles?
La Placita.
La Placita, yeah. So it seems like as it moves back to cultural relevance and self-culture in that kind of way, that it flirts a little bit with those kind of pagan influences.
Well, it does, but you'll find that that's often encouraged by Anglo-Clerics. You'll find this in black parishes. If a black parish has black priests, usually it's not so crazy. But if they have white priests, why?
Yeah, there's a church I think it's in Chicago, Detroit, but it's white. Have you seen this one, Rudy? It's a white priest, but they're so into African tribal drumming and that relevance and everything. Yeah, and
I got that in the church.
Yeah, and it's like of course it's like 10 white Susans and like one like black guy and like the priest, but they're doing tribal drumming and all this other kind of stuff,
Wow.
Well, see, though, you get, one of my black friends in LA, the inimitable Tequila Mockingbird. Yes, it's a stage name. She's a singer. Fine. Anyway, she and I were chatting years ago when Cardinal Mahoney brought in gospel masses, and I asked her what she thought of it and if she was going to go to one. And she looked at me and she said, "I'll tell you what. I'll start doing that when you start going to mass naked, painted blue, the way you're taking it."
Yeah, I mean, Rudy, you remember what was the story, Rudy? The rain stick? God bless you, COVID.
Excuse me. The
Can't
rain
get COVID through the screen. I'm sorry.
You remember the rain stick at consecration?
Oh yeah, I mean, compared to the wind chime and
the wind chime,
gong, and all that other stuff, that was not as bad. But yeah, there was a rain stick consecration instead of bells.
What was that supposed to be?
I have no idea. I mean, it was just one of those things where the choir just ran amok. The choir ran the show at this old parish.
Are you judging them, Charles?
Yeah. God, I'm incapable of judging.
That would be a sin.
Oh, that would be a sin. Well, the only sin is believing that there are sins, it seems.
Exactly. Now you're learning. So you're catching up. That's good.
So tell us, okay, you're native. You grew up in everything, and I think that for a lot of us young guys coming to bat, there's a picking up of the pieces of what the Wreckovations are. But you experienced a lot of this. So will you just tell us a little bit about your Catholic upbringing and really try to delve into what the changes actually look like? Because it seems like what there's now is happening is that I say there's a great memory holding that's going on, right? There's this kind of belief that Vatican II happened and that now, it's nice that there's some Latin masses and everything, and that the whole kind of span in between, it means like, it was a conversation and that, people just kind of chose.
No, it wasn't a conversation. People chose nothing. People did what they were told, and they were smacked around. Mm-hmm. That's what happened. Because you know what? Monsignor, he's the boss man. And that's it. And if you say, well, Monsignor, why are you taking out the statue? Why are you ripping this out? Why are you tearing that out? Who do you think you are to say that to me? Now, of course, if you were my father, you would say something like, oh, the moron who gives you money. But most Catholics weren't like that.
Was that obedience? The kind of
obedience was the Billy Club.
Okay,
literally. Forget the corrupt Irish Monsignor and think of a corrupt Irish cop. And they weren't all Irish by a long state, but the ones I knew, a lot of them were. Mm-hmm. And oh my gosh, they were nasty. If you questioned, if you asked, where does this come from? Well, Vatican II says, stop, where? And then you get some variation on who are you to question me? Where do you get your degree in theology? My father would always say something like, well, not on a Cracker Jacks box the way you did, apparently. But most people would never respond to a cleric that way. And they took it, and it was terrible. Any dissent was stepped on. And it's not as though you were given a choice. Well, the orders have come down from Rome, and so we're doing away with the last gospel, or we're doing this in English now, or we're doing that. Well, now we're going to be facing the people, you see, because that's the way it was done in the early church. They lied constantly. Now, whether they simply repeated lies or made them up, that's a whole other issue. And obviously some did some and others did the other. But it was all about power and who was in charge. They could do it. They had control, so they did it.
Does that extend down to the Wreckovation too? Like, what came first? Would you have gone to mass? Would you have gone to mass one day and it would have still been Latin or that quasi-Latin ad orientem? Then you come back and is the altar just gone, or did it start with the Versus Populum? Or
well, it depended on where you were. We're being in a Jesuit parish in Hollywood, which fortunately was too poor to wreck anything. well, see, those are the kinds of churches that can't do everything the best, that had been built in rich neighborhoods and had money to build.
Mm-hmm.
But then when the council came along, were too poor to destroy anything up, because they just didn't have the money to rip out the altar rail, the altars, or anything. As to which came first, a lot depended on where you were and what the bishop was like. So the major Wreckovations in Los Angeles came later. The changes in the Mass came first, because Cardinal McIntyre was not a great one for allowing Wreckovations.
Mm.
But Manning was, his successor. So I'm very, as I think back, I mean, my experience too was colored by the fact that we were living in Hollywood at Blessed Sacrament. And so part of my experience at that time was the whole Immaculate Heart nun drama.
Well, will you explain that real quick?
Well, sure. Basically, the Immaculate Heart Sisters, the IHMs, were an order originally from Spain. And in the 1920s, they broke with their Spanish leadership and became an independent Californian foundation.
Mm.
The Archbishop of Los Angeles was their canonical superior. So they had problems, obviously, hence the break with Spain. They would consider themselves very intellectual. They owned a college, Immaculate Heart College, a high school, Immaculate Heart High School for girls. Both the college and the high school were girls' schools. They taught in a number of elementary schools as well, including mine. We used to say IHM stood for I Hate Men. But at any rate, they had issues. But these issues got worse when a psychologist named Carl Rogers took care of them in the summer of 67. The summer of, 67. They voted and decided to get rid of their rules, get rid of their habits, get rid of everything. And they told Cardinal McIntyre that if he didn't like it, they'd stop teaching in his schools. They gave him an ultimatum.
Can we back up just real quick? You said that they voted to get rid of the clerical, the garb. I mean, so was that actually, just in terms of how the church works, was it possible prior to Vatican II to do that, to vote on your habit like that, or would that kind of thing need approval? Not like it mattered clearly in this case, but
it would need approval, obviously, and of course it did require approval, and the cardinal refused to give it to him.
Mm. I understand. So they were like, "Look, we're doing this, and
whether you like it or not. If you don't like it, we're going to leave your schools."
I see.
And so he said, "Well, I'll be sorry to see you go, but bye-bye." Now, this happened when I was in second grade. And they had a plebiscite, as it were, after they dropped their habits. Now, mind you, we lived next door to the convent. So we had seen them creeping up the Hollywood Boulevard in civilian clothes, months before they came clean at school. They would still wear the habit at school, even though they weren't wearing it to go doing whatever they did. So, long and the short of it is that after they did this, in each of our classrooms at Blessed Sacrament, they called our name. These were done in each set class separately. They call your name in and stand up and say yes or no. Yes if you agreed with the changes, no if you didn't. Now, everybody in my class, when Sister's standing there in civilian clothing, you know what she wants. She's got the power of life and death over it. So everyone said yes. So she got the Coulombe, and I said no. And she said, "Well, Mr. Coulombe, won't you come to the front of the class and explain to us all why you disagree?" Well, I was fit to be tied. I mean, I knew we were being used, and I knew that I was going to make an example of. I went up, I turned around, I faced my classmates, and I said, "The soldier has his uniform, a priest has his cassock, and a nun has a habit. If she doesn't want to wear it, she shouldn't be a nun."
How old were you?
I hadn't been disrespectful. I was 7. I hadn't been disrespectful.
Mm-hmm.
So all she could say was, sit down. That was it. And because nothing happened to me, everybody else said no. So the second grade was a wash. In my brother's class, he was in 8th grade, same, and then he gets sent up. And he said, well, sister, I just don't understand. If you don't have to obey the cardinal, why do we have to obey you? So my father got 2 very angry calls that night from 2 very annoying nuns.
This story is I already can tell is a great credit to your parents, because when your 7-year-old, just for a story I heard recently, one of my coworkers, he's a fellow parishioner with me at for Latin Mass, and at their school here in Colorado, they recently had a thing where they forbade communion on the tongue. They had it for a second, and I've heard your talks on ultra vires and the actual law of the church, but that kind of stuff doesn't matter. So what's funny is that his daughter is 10, I do believe, and one day she went up, she was going to receive on the tongue, and they said no, stick out your hand. It's not like this is a bad place, like this isn't like the drag heap of schools, but again, this just kind of shows the times. And she was like, well, no, I'm not doing that. And what's funny is that kind of witness was infectious, because a lot of her classmates were like, okay, no, well, like, we don't want to do it. So there has to be a meeting with the principal and with the priest and all that kind of stuff. But that's incredible that at 7, they're essentially lording over you to accept the changes. Yeah. And this is a story. This is the story I hear all the time for this kind of time. It's that everyone's like, all right, whatever, we'll go along with it, because who wants to challenge your nun or your priest, or your bishop or whatever, even if you have the law of the church on your side, it doesn't matter. And then one gets dragged up from the line, one amongst many.
And so also don't forget that the way a lot of people reacted to all this stuff was they just left the church. They just left. I mean, you got to bear in mind that prior to this time, the priests had claimed to partake in the infallibility of the Pope. No matter, they never said that.
Right.
But that was the impression they tried to give. But then suddenly they reversed themselves on a ton of different things. So then the question becomes what my brother asked one of these jokers. Well, Father, my question is, when were you lying, then or now?
Mm-hmm.
See, if you're lying now, that's okay, because you only started lying fairly recently. But if you were lying then, you've always lied.
So we hear terms like the springtime of the new evangelization and all the buzzwords post. I know. And let me tell you this, right? As a 90s kid, I've always said this, because I work now at the Augustine Institute. And one thing I say is that it seems like the new evangelization is just going to be the old evangelization with new tools.
No.
So, but what I hear when I hear new evangelization and springtime and all this kind of stuff is that there's this immediate demonization of the old. And maybe you could speak to this, because I've heard the story that people are like, well, Vatican II is a response to people leaving the church or people being lax in their faith or something. And what I think is, if the Second Vatican Council was going to address this, why would it have found something like the fraternity or just a greater liturgical reverence or relevance in that kind of way? So what was the cause for Vatican II on the ground? Were there a lot of Catholics that were leaving the church? Was there that poor of catechesis? Were you having, as a Catholic growing in a Catholic school with nuns, was your education that abysmal already?
No, but what there was a certain lack of enthusiasm, going through the motions. So you got to bear in mind, if the thing had been in good shape, it wouldn't have collapsed so quickly. So it's not as though there weren't problems. There were. I mean, the liturgical movement, before it went crazy, had a very laudable goal, which was to make liturgy the center of life, which it very often was not. I mean, we've all heard horror stories, I'm sure, 15-minute low masses during the week and things like that.
Yeah, that's true?
No, it's very true.
Okay.
And one of the ironies to me is that the vast majority of today's traditional mass communities have actually achieved the ideals of the liturgical movement. which is very strange if you think about it, but it's true, because in such places, the Mass really is the center of everything. It's what brings people there. It is high Masses and solemn high Masses were not very common. You'd have them on major feast days if you were lucky, but they weren't that common. And yet, they are the Sunday rule in most Latin Mass communities today.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, it's almost as though, despite themselves, they're accomplishing the goals the early liturgical movement set itself. Before Vatican II, what you often had was in the major cities, you'd have the liturgical parish. And that was the parish that was supposed to be sort of the exemplar for all the others. They'd have the best choir, they'd have the most elaborate masses. Maybe they would have not just a solemn high as the biggest mass of the Sunday, but they might have solemn vespers and benediction at night. And very often, especially if you lived a little bit out of town, you come into town for the Sunday. You'd go to Mass at the church, the high Mass, etc. Then you'd spend the afternoon, go to the park, go to the zoo or whatever, and then go back to the church for vespers and benediction, and then you go home. So you'd spend the day in town, spend Sunday in town. And then of course there was the thing too that some people, because of the regulations on fasting, first from midnight and then from Pius XII on 3 hours. What a lot of people did was they would go to communion outside of Mass early in the morning, and then go to the high Mass in the later morning, so they could eat breakfast, you say.
Mm.
So, there were things like that, but that really, I don't think that was the biggest problem. I think the biggest problem was then, as it is now, is a lack of faith on the part of the clergy. And I think that was one of the things John the 23rd was concerned about. But, he didn't get the chance to address it. And so the council went off into all sorts of other areas, some of which they didn't do a bad job of addressing, to be fair. But none of it, at least if we're to trust either John the 23rd or Paul VI, or both, none of it was imbued with an infallible character.
Mm-hmm. And
what that means is that if you see something in the council that appears, I emphasize appears, to contradict prior solemn teaching, then you just have to ignore it.
If I may ask, what is your kind of statement on how we go forward with the Second Vatican Council? I'm under the...
Go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, I'm under the kind of guise where I say, look, the church had the competency to call it. It's a valid council insofar that it happened, but it's a weird council because there's no anathemas, and it's kind of like the hermeneutic or continuity crowd for the things that are already set in tradition that it extols upon, the dogma, like the dogmatic pronouncement and everything. Yeah, it's totally fine. Of course it is. I'm happy that it talks about Latin in the liturgy, or at least in chant and all that kind of stuff. Not like it mattered. But I do have problems in particular when it says something like when on religious indifferentism. I think that's apparent in Lumen Gentium, and Rudy and I were going through. Was it Lumen Gentium we were going through, Rudy? Which Nostra Aeterne? What was it? Aetate. Thank you.
I think it was Humane? No. It was something else. Sorry, I'm thinking about something else.
Yeah, I think. But point being is, when it says Muslims, bear the faith of Isaac, and together with us worship the one true God.
Right.
And I just say it's like, well, from a historical record, no, that they don't have a historical record. It seems more like a co-opting. And even so, should we as Christians now be mad that Hagia Sophia has been turned into a mosque because it's the same one true God, right? So,
yeah, the truth is, of course, we don't even have quite the same Christ as the Protestants.
Yeah.
So, Well, I'll tell you, I have to agree with John Beaumont, who makes the rather funny comment that the SSPX, to take the Bête Noire, would agree with 80% of what's in the council and disagree with 20%. He said that isn't the problem. The problem is that so many bishops, heads of seminaries, and the superiors of religious orders would accept the 20% and reject the 80%. And that's something no one talks about. And as for where we're going forward, I think one day Vatican II will be remembered like Lateran 10.
What's Lateran 10?
Exactly.
That reminds me, Charles, I have to thank you for saving a friendship.
Well,
because that's the same premise that you used in the last time we interviewed you, when you were talking about the elections. You know, you made the example of who ran against Reagan in '80.
Oh.
And you mentioned nobody would remember that. And I plagiarized that like Joe Biden. And I sent that to my buddy, who is a searching leftist, I think. And I'm trying to get him to the church. But we were having a spat because he was upset that I was voting for Trump. And so I told him, look, there's more important things than who I'm voting for right now. And I want to be friends with you. So I mean, gotta thank you for that.
You're welcome. I mean, in 10 years, 20 years, you're not going to remember it. And I'll tell you something. The friend who inspired that particular comment died 2 years ago. Mm-hmm. He was my closest friend at school. Not a day goes by I don't miss him. Now imagine that we'd allowed the election of 1980 to come between us.
I think if it's possible for a monarchist to be friends with a Republican, then surely it's acceptable for two people of the same sort of general ilk to also be friends.
Well, you would think that two Republicans would be able to get along, but apparently not. I mean, you know. Well, the other thing too, I've decided as of today. I tweeted this. That I'm going to cease, so you know it's true now. I'm going to cease all commentary on the election. Now, you're probably wondering why that is.
Why is that?
Glad you asked that question. It's because everyone's minds are made up.
Yeah.
I guess so.
Yeah, so what's the point?
I mean, I think that this is the perfect time, really, honestly, to inject monarchy, genuinely, because if you want to talk about the ills of mass democracy just in this time, you know, and obviously, look, like I got my Trump Pence vibe, but it's only because I figure if the empire is going to be restored, it might as well be under him. Like, I'm just like, at this point, I'm done.
I'm just pulling myself away to reveal my flags.
Yeah. Well, you see my Charles, I want to ask real quick, back to something that you might have touched on earlier. So you said that you grew up, your main parish was Blessed Sacrament, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. Were you an altar server, or did you guys just attend, or?
No, I was an altar server briefly. My brother was an altar server behind. We call them altar boys because we didn't have altar girls then.
Oh yes, forgive. Yeah,
so
I have to.
Altar boys.
This is my ninth.
Well, see, a real trad would be all over you. They were altar boys, moron. We didn't have any altar girls.
Don't prepare the comments, Rudy.
Biting my lips.
Well, Rudy, what you kind of missed, one thing earlier that he said was in second grade when you were 7, the nuns at Blessed Sacrament voted to do away with the habits and with all the trappings of the medieval church. Really? And so they lined all the kids up.
Not their control.
Oh, but
that was not their control. I see.
Their control they kept.
They asked all the kids if they were okay with the changes, and Charles and his brother, who was in 8th grade at the time, were the only ones who were like, no. And what was the quip that you said, Charles?
Well, what I said, we each had our different answers. What I said was, a soldier has his uniform, a priest has his cassock, and another has a habit. She doesn't want to wear it. She shouldn't be a nun. And my brother said, well, I just don't understand, sister. If you don't have to obey the cardinal, why do we have to obey you?
Ooh. Good answers.
Well, but see, it always comes down to keeping the power. You give up the trappings, but you keep the power. And see, that way you can pretend that you're like everybody else, except that you own everything, and they better do as you tell them, how much God they have. Oh. I'm sorry, I meant sweetness and light to all. That's what I meant.
Will you tell us about your parents a little bit, especially at this time period? Because I like Rudy and I've talked about this, where it's like, if we were as we are at the time of all these changes, I don't know how I would have to pray for the grace to really hang on, you know?
Well, I can tell you,
Rudy more than me, you know. Is that fair?
Well, Rudy lives in Glendale, so you can't expect anything anyway. Well, no, Glendale's fine. It's just a little, you know.
Well, he's in Burbank now.
Listen, Charles, I moved to Burbank. Okay.
Yo.
Oh, Robert Bellarmine. Yeah,
I'm a Burbankian now.
Robert. All I can say is Robert Bellarmine. That is a church for you. St. Robert Bellarmine.
Oh, yeah. I've only been in there once, and I don't think I'll ever go back.
Rudy and I met at St. Finbar's.
Yeah.
That's cheating. St. Robert Bellarmine is the heart of Burbank Catholicism, and it's attended high school, Bellarmine Jefferson. It doesn't get better than that.
The two great thinkers of the church, Charles. How dare you?
That's right. The two great church fathers, St. Robert Bellarmine and St. Thomas Jefferson. Yeah, and that's exactly why they were bracketed like that in the school's name.
Santo Subito.
Yeah, that's one way to look at it, I guess. No, the priest who founded St. Robert Bellarmine and Beljeff was very definitely an Americanist. And that's why St. Robert Bellarmine is like a New England meeting house. It was built in the 50s. And it looks like a New England meeting house.
That was Ashley's parish before Finbar's, wasn't it, Rudy?
No, I believe she went somewhere else.
Okay.
Yeah, I can't remember. It's another one around here. It's like in the hills. Yeah.
So, all right, fine. You're in beautiful downtown Burbank, home of Laugh-In and Johnny Carson. Great. Anyway. So, Burbank Confidential. There's a film we need. No, but seriously, the thing was, as far as my parents go, how do I describe it? Well, I mean, I agree with you. If I had to have the parents I had, I doubt very much that I would be a Catholic today. Very, very much. And then there were a couple of other influences in addition to that, which I'll touch on. But my dad was a very interesting man. My parents were actors. They had met on a radio stage in New York. They were radio actors at the time. Dad was French Canadian, third generation in the United States. French was his first language. But he spoke English perfectly. Well, he'd been a radio actor, didn't have a choice. In fact, my English was really his English, because he got sick and tired of hearing me sounding like a Canuck me. And he didn't want it. He didn't like the idea when I was getting good out of school that I would be talking like that, you know. So he sat me down every day for the summer, and he taught me how to speak just like him. So that's why I speak the best bloody by God English you ever buy in store, you, huh? That's right. So I don't sound like I just come out of the backwoods of Quebec, me. No, sir. Sir, even I sound like a real Anglo, huh? So anyway, the truth is that he came from a family that had been, as I say, they were French Canadian immigrants, and they had been part of the Sentinelle affair back in the 20s, when it looked like the French Canadians, or a chunk of them in New England, would go away to the Polish nationals. They didn't, but they never trusted the Irish clergy again. And that's why when everything went crazy, my dad didn't go crazy, because he used to say, well, now they're finally behaving the way they were on the inside, like Protestants. which may seem like an oversimplification, but it wasn't really. So he didn't let it faze him. He would read our books, our school books, my brother and me, every time we get a new batch, start of every semester. And if he thought something was wrong, he would tell us. And he'd tell us why he thought it was wrong. Never expected us to believe it just because he was our father. He was particularly careful to look through our religion books and correct mistakes. He was quite simply the most wonderful man I ever met in my entire life from then to now. He was a tail gunner in World War II. A very, very well-spoken man, very gentlemanly, but tough as nails. And people often mistook his gentlemanly demeanor as weakness. That was always a mistake. Because he was not a weak man. And if you thought he was, you'd find out pretty quickly how wrong you were. He's a complete believer, but he had an intellectual curiosity, the like of which I've never seen. I mean, he was interested in everything. He was very much an autodidact. He left high school before graduation to fight the Japanese. And he went to the GI, he went to the American Academy of Dramatic Arts under the GI Bill, and that was all of his higher education. But he read and read and read. Huge library, real, as I say, autodidact. And brilliant man. And I can honestly say that all of the intellectual interests I have today, I inherited from my father, without a doubt. And he was interested in everything. My mother was a very different background. She a lot more money than my father's people, I can tell you. Her father had, amongst other things, he taught at Harvard and Columbia. He had written for Commonweal and the old New York Graphic and a whole bunch of other things. Grandpa was a very intellectual Catholic, is the best way I can put it. And he knew a lot of the greats of his time, Colonel Lindbergh, people like that. And he taught me a concept, which my mother certainly reinforced, I've never forgotten, which is the idea of the church. You heard the church militant, the church temporal, the church suffering. Church triumphant, I meant to say. But Grandpa introduced the notion of the church spiritual and the church political. As you put it, the church spiritual is the devotions, the sacraments, the saints, all that kind of thing. The church political are the men who run it. And the relationship is like the soul and the body. The soul is always, in its sense, perfect. The body is given to all sorts of problems. The problems of the body don't make the soul any less perfect, but the soul can be affected by the problems of the body. And that was why he always said, you may dislike or doubt churchmen all you like, but never doubt the church. So those are my parents. They were a lot of fun. They were wide awake when other people's parents seemed to sleep. And I admired them both very, very much. So when the changes came, it cut them up. But they were tough people. They were fighters. And I remember my mother, who had quite a sharp tongue. They asked her, "Well, what do you think of letting priests marry?" And she said, "Good God, what kind of woman would have one of them?" And the trick in my family is always say what's not expected. Never respond to the bait. So again, she was asked, "What do you think of women's ordination?" And she said, "Oh, I'm against it. They should start ordaining men."
Wow, what a lion.
Well, I'll tell you what, people didn't come back for second helping, so they were smart. So and that, I learned a lot from my parents as to how you deal with these morons. They want to, because they were always dealing from a position of power, they presumed a certain narrative, a certain script, in which you were supposed to behave in a certain manner. What they showed me is you never do. You never, ever, ever give what's expected. If the priest says, "Oh well, we don't believe in the rosary anymore." Wow, I don't believe in collections anymore, Father. Isn't that strange? I guess we're all getting updated in our own way, aren't we? And when Cardinal Mahoney wrote that Christ is present at the Mass in memory and in hope, Dad's response was, "And that's the way my money will be in his collection plate." Wow,
what a patriot!
Well, he was just doing his little bit, tried to help, So that their example was very useful to me, partly because they never pretended, they never tried to sugarcoat, and they never took guff for these people. My dad used to say, especially some priests, we call screamers, because if you showed any doubt or opposition to what they would tell you, they'd start yelling. So my father's way of doing that was to shut them down immediately. Shut your mouth, Father. Keep a civil tongue in your head. Who do you think you're yelling at? Well, that wasn't what they were expecting. But as my father explained to me, you've got to bear in mind that most men, we know we can only go so far in being annoying before somebody shuts us up. And we don't sit around thinking about it, but in the back of your mind, you know that if you start waving your finger in people's noses and being obnoxious, sooner or later, not this guy you're doing to it, maybe, but sooner or later, you keep up with this stuff and somebody's going to haul off and belt you.
Yeah.
We know this on a very basic level, and it helps to keep us from behaving badly. Because let's face it, we're all fallen, and if we could do any old thing we wanted, we'd be monsters. Well, he said, the poor dear fathers don't have this aid to holiness. And so they often behave any way they want, in the worst way possible. And if they do it to you, be assured they're going to be doing it to someone else. So you owe it not just to someone else, but to them. Mm-hmm. Shut them down. No, Father, you don't talk like that to grown-ups. Bad touch, bad. I do. What's that?
Is that the antidote, would you say, to the kind of, you hear the criticisms of clericalism, and I find it kind of rich sometimes, depending on who's telling it, but is that the antidote just for us to realize that for the sake of the position of the priest, you have to be able to say an ultra vires?
Yeah, you have to say, no, you're wrong, Father, you can't do that. It's ultra vires.
Well, there's also a sort of not exactly an ultramontantist perspective in the church now, in relation to the Pope, but I'm saying there's a sort of relation like that with the priests where people feel they can't criticize the priest. They feel it would be
criticize the priest is to criticize God.
Yeah, no. It would be something extreme like that.
Well, I'll tell you, there may be some of it now, but there was a ton when I was a kid, which is one reason why they were able to get away with so much. And for that matter, it fed into the abuse scandals for obvious reasons. Mm-hmm. It fit into all kinds of things. It really has not been good for the church. You see, the inability to distinguish an office from the holder of that office, whether you're quote unquote positive, quote unquote negative, it's a terrible thing for both the man and the office. You see, if, for instance, you can't distinguish, and an office is held by a man you think is an utter scumbag, you'll lose your respect for the office. Right. Contrariwise, if you can't separate the two, your respect for the office may blind you to the malfeasances of the man.
Mm-hmm.
And these are two twin dangers. I say they're very, very difficult, especially in a quote unquote democratic period like ours, where we refuse to accept that we have natural betters, that some people are an authority over us.
Mm-hmm.
Losing that, however, also means we lose the fact that being an authority comes with certain responsibilities, and that our obedience is heavily tied to their performance of their duties.
Absolutely.
It's a very, these are distinctions that are difficult for us moderns to make, but they're very important. The way I like to illustrate the thing, taking it away from the church because it's so emotional. But let's pretend for a minute that I was your city councilman, right? And I had this kind of attitude so many of the clergy have. So I say to you, Rudy, Jordan, being your city councilman is for me the fulfillment of my life journey. It's so fulfilling for me to be your city councilman. And as your city councilman, your civil servant, I feel wonderful being here for you. And you're listening to me. And finally you say, Councilman Coulombe, that's great. But are you ever going to get the potholes filled in the streets, maybe get the trash picked up, maybe have the police make sure that we can walk the streets like at 10 p.m.? How about that? Oh, yeah. Well, Rudy, I appreciate your concern in those areas, but that's really more the old paradigm of what a city councilman is. I'm not about that. I'm all about the bigger picture of the city council. I think it's, I'm going on and on and on. Well, if you don't have the gumption or the something to finally say, Councilman Coulombe, you are really full of it. I don't give a damn about your self-fulfillment. You're of importance to me only to the degree that you do your job as city councilman. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, to be brutally frank with you, Mr. Coulombe, I don't care if you live or die. I know you don't care if I live or die, just as long as I vote for you. So, it's quid pro quo. But, fill my potholes, get the trash off the streets, and make it so my wife can walk alone at night. And you know what? Maybe I'll vote for you next time. How about that? Well, the same is true of the church, although we don't vote for them. Now, having said that, they were a huge part of my keeping the faith. Meeting Cardinal McIntyre was another big part. He was my confessor during high school. He had a real life before he went to the seminary, to say. And he gave it up to become a priest. And he always did have the drive. Great man, tough as nails again. Nobody's fool, but a complete believer. Knew where all the bodies were buried, knew how bad church politics could be, knew all that stuff. But he really believed. And to me, as with my parents, to be honest with you, the combination of complete faith and complete realism, I've always found, it's what I've always striven for. Now, he in turn gave me a bit of advice, which helped determine the course of my life, helped keep the faith. He was of the opinion, remember this is the 70s, when the most popular processional hymn in the Archdiocese was Put Your Hand in the Hand of the Man.
Will you sing a little bit for us? Because I don't even know that one.
Oh, okay, sure. Put your hand in the hand of the man who stilled the water. Put your hand in the hand of the man who walked on the sea. Take a look at yourself and you will look at others differently. So put your hand in the hand of the man from Galilee.
Oh, no. That's actually worse than anything I've ever heard.
Please tell me, is that St. Louis Jesuits? Is that who wrote it?
That was a popular song. It was a pop song at the time. See, they used pop songs in the Mass. Another one, this was very popular as a communion hymn, this is why, you're thinking about, oh, well, after Vatican II, okay. Yeah, okay, I'll help. Here you are. This is a communion hymn. They played it at my first communion. I'll never forget it. Today, while the blossoms still cling to the vine, I'll taste your strawberries, I'll drink your sweet wine. A million tomorrows may all pass away, ere I forget all the joy that is mine today.
Yikes. And this is before the council.
No, this was in the immediate aftermath. This is 68, 1968.
Charles, I have a question for you. I've run into this more often now than ever, but there's people who say that it's wrong for us to think that the sort of explosion in abuse, the explosion of not getting your child baptized, like all of the signature bad things that we're seeing in the church today, we can't say that it directly comes from the council. What do you think about that?
Well, there's a sense in which that's true. There's a sense in which it's not. Mm-hmm. The fact is that in the immediate aftermath of the council, as with the dear IHMs, the message that came down to everybody was, let it all hang out. Do your own thing. Remember, this was also at the time of the age of Aquarius. It was break down all the barriers. Mm-hmm. People literally were ordained priests with the idea that the church was going to be allowing priests to marry within a couple of years. You know, when it didn't, they were terribly upset and left. So the wreckage of the liturgy, the constant changing of things, it was an ongoing. Well, I mean, if you liked that kind of thing, it was great. It was liberating. You know, you were like a kid breaking stuff. You ever have a little kid loose when he can break bottles or dishes or things when you just go to town on it? He loves it. Just smashes things right and left. Little mouth grinning ear to ear, eyes flashing with joy. Well, that's how these people were. That's how they were when they were pulling things out of the churches and bringing in the guitars and everything into Mass. Isn't it wonderful to be at the start of a whole new liturgy? Said a priest to me. I was like 10. I looked at him and I said, no. But he didn't pay any attention. He just said, he smiled and walked on. He wasn't paying any attention. I could have said my nose is a turnip, but he wouldn't have cared.
He said that was a rhetorical question.
Oh, yeah. Well, he believed me. He was completely on his own path and doing his own thing, working his own program, as the Marines said. And that, you know, great. That's fine. Will
you? There's something I think you mentioned to both of us a long time ago. But will you talk a little bit about? It seems like the impression is that it was kind of the later '80s and the '90s where sacramentals and the Rosary and adoration, these kind of things were, you know, the JP2 kind of Catholic era. But in the immediate aftermath, what was the effect for Vespers, for adoration, for the Rosary, for sacramentals? Was there any change at all in that kind of?
All went out the window. I literally did not see a monstrance at all from my remote childhood until I was maybe 26.
Jeez.
That is insane.
I'm sure they had them. I'm sure people did them, but not any of the parishes I went to.
Yeah, probably in the safe.
Well, sure. I mean, I'm sure they must have used them in some places, but I never saw them. And I remember, well, as a Boy Scout, I got the Adulatory Day Award, and my counselor for our class was a Jesuit priest named Father Dahlheimer at Blessed Sacrament, where Jesuits could be found in some profusion in those days. Well, I asked him about the monstrance because we were talking about the sacred vessels, because one of the requirements for the Adulatory Day is you got to describe the vessels and vestments of the Mass and explain what they're used for. So I said, well, how about the monstrance? And he said, oh, we don't use that anymore.
That's really sad.
Yeah, no, not really. It's criminal. Sad is when you get hit by lightning.
Yeah.
Criminal is when I steal your wallet. Which of these two things do you think that was closer to?
Yeah.
Although, to be fair to Father Dahlheimer, he was just repeating,
what he'd.
Yeah.
This is the one thing that I think all this is trads here, and something I've heard from you that I just want to say, it's that, I've heard, well, why are there rad trads? Why are there angry trads? And we here on the podcast are Risus et Bellum, right? We think very much that's the way forward. But one thing that I remember you said is, it wasn't that they started it, if you will.
Yeah.
Imagine like the whole of the faith as you've known it. And so it's not about smells and bells and trappings for people who are like, well, it's all about just believing in Jesus. Like, well, that's the heart. But imagine if you've grown up your entire life believing that this is the Holy of Holies and this is how we enshrine and enthrone it, and then being demonized for asking, well, what the heck happened to this whole...
And more than that, having this stuff attacked and you're being smacked around for questioning by the very people who have been pushing it not 10 or maybe even 5 years before. I mean, you see, that is what I mean by there being a problem. Because if you can change your views that quickly, the suspicion has to be that you really didn't have an opinion anyway. You would just, the boss man say this, so I say that. Now he changed, I change. Well, that's nice, but it means you're a zero. You have no real belief in anything. You're just a party man. You follow the party line. And that was the hardest and nastiest revelation. And mind you, most people did not see it that clearly. They felt the hurt of daddy suddenly smacking them around. But my dad said, well, you've got to understand that they really didn't believe anything before either. If they had, they would be reacting differently. But they didn't, so they'll say whatever they're told to say, and the content doesn't mean anything to them. That was something my dad was very big about. Don't say anything unless you believe it. If you don't believe it, shut up. You've got nothing to say that needs to be heard. And he was right. I mean, a lot. I mean, it's like, for instance, mutatis mutandis. A lot of people during the COVID crisis have had a hard time understanding why so many bishops and priests have so cavalierly closed the churches, cut off the sacraments without any apparent concern. Oh, well, just make a perfect contrition and do a spiritual communion, and you're good to hope. Well, because of the COVID situation, their behavior has finally caught up with their belief or lack thereof. So in a sense, this allows you to have a taste of what we went through back in the 60s. And it's a horrible realization. Because if I, as the cleric, say to you that really all you need is a perfect end of contrition and an act of spiritual communion, what am I really saying? I'm really saying you don't need me, you don't need the sacraments, and really, you never did. What I'm actually saying to you, although I'm not aware of it or I wouldn't say it, I'm a fraud and a phony. Eat it. There's nothing you can do about it. I am as phony as a $3 bill. Yep. And if you don't like it, lump it. Because guess who owns the church, moron? I do.
And certainly is a feeling. We've had an episode on the limits of obedience, and that was around Easter time. So I would say,
it's a tough one. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think we're seeing it more because it's now 6 months since we've all been dispensed from Mass. the fact that baptisms, in particular, baptisms, weddings, all the sacraments, everything's been relegated to a closet. There are now cases where it's very clear that the state has control over how liturgy is to be celebrated amongst the church, and the church didn't even fight for it in a lot of places.
No.
It feels like.
Well, see, what that does, incidentally, is that it shows us the United States and many other places the idea of church and state as though these somehow were analogous institutions is not believed in by the leadership in church and state. The truth is, it's more church and Rotary Club, church and Kiwanis, church and Future Farmers of America, church and any other voluntary organization that, doubtless does something for people who like that kind of thing, but is not in itself a power. It's a nice little group for people who like to get together and, play that. It's like the Society for Creative Anachronism, or the Renaissance Fair. It's like that. People like to do medieval dress up. That's all it is.
Yeah.
Apparently. And I don't think that kind of thing should be paid for, if that's all it is.
Will you tell us as we kind of wind down, because I don't think we should end on such a bleak. Your rediscovery of I know that you go to the Latin Mass, and also I've been to the Anglican Ordinariate because I heard about it from you. But the discovery of richer liturgy, the Latin Mass, in both that time and what that was, it until your 20s that you found it again, or?
Yeah, well, I'll tell you, I had begun the story and I got waylaid, so I'll tell you. So there we were in the 70s, listening to Put Your Hand in the Hand, etc. And Cardinal McIntyre had this strange idea that my faith was slowly being leached out of me through lack of exposure to decent literature. So he hit upon a novel, and dare I say, a unique solution to the problem. I say unique because I can't imagine him doing this for 2 or 4 anybody else. He said, here's what I want you to do. Go to Mass Saturday night, receive communion, fulfill your obligation. Sunday, I want you to go into Las Feliz. There's a church, an Episcopal church called St. Mary of the Angels. Mm-hmm. There you'll see an approximation of the way things should be done. He had no fear of my turning Episcopalian, especially because this was February of '76. And that too had an effect, as I'll mention in a moment. So I get down there. And St. Mary's was higher than the kite, Anglo-Catholic. I mean, you talk about smells and bells. Well, they had them. More than that, though, every other Sunday, they would alternate English chant versus Latin. And it so happened that I'd hit their Latin. And I was exposed to the asperges for the first time in my life in Latin. And the rest of it, the Sanctus, the Agnus Dei, it was astonishing, a revelation. So the liturgy was amazing. The second thing that I found amazing about the place was the pamphlet rack. Because the thing about Anglo-Catholics is that they had to explain everything they did to non-Anglo-Catholic Anglicans who might visit. So they had pamphlets on the real presence, on praying for the dead, on praying to Mary, praying to the Virgin, to the saints, why they had candles, why they had lights, why they used unleavened bread. I mean, stuff that one should have been getting in Catholic school and didn't. And I pillaged that pamphlet rack. Then the third thing, you must understand that I was used to a certain level of, or shall we say, intellectual Catholicism in French and German, not English. In my experience, English-speaking Catholics did not have a very intellectual religious life. But these were Anglo-Catholics. So, a lot of writers, artists, actors, and so forth, that kind of people, only speaking English. It was amazing to me. And the funny thing about it, parenthetically, there was an old lady, I was about to say little, but she was actually fairly tall, named Millicent McWilliams. Millicent McCambridge, sorry. Anyway, she was a costume designer for the movies, Millicent of Hollywood. In fact, my white formal scarf she made for me 40 years ago. But Millicent, really an amazing lady. But the first time I took my parents to St. Mary's, we're down after the Mass in the Undercroft. And she looks at them and says, Pat, Guy. And they look at her, Millicent? Well, they had known her in New York when she was Millicent of Broadway. And from that time on, whenever I would see her, she'd say, and how are your parents, dear? And I said, oh, they're fine, Millicent, they're fine. Oh, I just love those kids. And she had a very different view of my parents than I did, apparently. So, at any rate, they were very, very pleasant people. But this was, as I said, February of 1976, and the Episcopal Church was facing its Waterloo with the ordination of women, or the General Convention that year. So St. Mary's had all sorts of things as to why you can't have priestesses. And mind you, they used arguments of the Church Fathers, the Scriptures, and all that. In other words, precisely the same arguments that any Catholic would make. So that taught me a lot about the priesthood. So I got to know them very, very well. And you know how Pope Francis is always saying we have to accompany people.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
Yes. So although I didn't become Episcopalian, I accompanied St. Mary's through its struggle against women's ordination, its attempts to find a place in the post-world after it seceded from Rome, not from Rome, from the Episcopal Church, and because its rector, Father Barker, was one of the small group of seceding Episcopalians who wanted to go to Rome. I was present and around for the formation of the pastoral provision. Now, unfortunately, because both Cardinal Manning and then his immediate successor, Cardinal Mahoney, were very close to the Episcopal bishop, St. Mary's was not received into the Catholic Church, unlike the other parishes of the other parts of the country. So they went off into the alphabet soup of the Anglican continuum, where they are to this day. They came very close to coming into the ordinariate, but then there was sort of an internal explosion, and that did not happen, which breaks my heart, because I love that parish and I feel very indebted to it as well for having helped me keep my faith. The last element to that keeping came when I was in high school and I went to work for a priest named Father Fyodor Wilcock, S.J., yes, a Jesuit, who was the pastor of St. Andrew's Russian Catholic Church in El Segundo. And when Cardinal McIntyre died, he took his place as my confessor. Well, from him, I learned all about the Byzantine rite and the other Eastern rites of the Church. And through, he was the head of the Ecumenical Commission of the Archdiocese, but he also belonged to something called the Society of St. James of Jerusalem, that gathered Eastern Catholic, Eastern Orthodox, Coptic, Armenian, Ethiopian, Episcopal, Anglo-Catholic types in monthly meetings. And so I went to a number of these gatherings. Those were fascinating. Anyway, you put all those people, places, and things together, and that's why I'm still a Catholic today.
Deo gratias.
Well, it took a huge support team, I can tell you. So to answer your question, what would you have done in my time? God knows. I don't know what I would have done without it. I'd probably be leading my own cult by now.
I mean, you might as well have the right.
Yeah, I mean, well, it makes some dough, you know. But
I would join.
Well, it'd be all about the Ascended Masters and the Count of Saint Germain and the Murians and all that good stuff. You know, one of the things I've pointed out on the podcast that few people realize is the heroic part Los Angeles played in World War II. Not just driving off the Japanese, but driving off an alien invasion.
Oh, yes.
That's right. The Battle of Los Angeles. The image I gave poor Vinny, I don't think he's ever going to recover, of Tilano Chardin in Colorado manning an anti-aircraft gun and singing "Praise the Lord" and pass the ammunition. To this day, he says he wakes up in a cold sweat, having had a nightmare of that very scene.
There is, we haven't even gotten to Cardinal Mahoney and where Rudy and I were still whippersnappers, but that's just going to be for part 3. Charles, will you please tell our audience where they can find you, what books of yours would be recommended, all that kind of good stuff?
Well, usually I'm available at the bar at Musso and Frank's after 5. No. No, I wish that were true. No. I can be found at the Tumbler House YouTube channel. So put in Tumbler House YouTube, it'll pop up. My weekly podcast is called Off the Menu. Tumbler House also offer a large selection of various of my books. My most recent book, just out this month, is The Life of Kaiser Karl, the Emperor Charles, the legacy of a holy emperor. I recommend it very, very highly to you. It's gotten some very good initial reviews and so forth, so I'm happy about that. I'm living in Austria, going to school. I hope to come home for Christmas. Thank you for taking the cue. Exactly. I'll be home.
They sing that at Mass too, I'm sure.
Well, no, nothing quite that orthodox. But actually, my favorite of the horror hymns that came in the immediate wake went, Sons of God, hear his holy word, gather round the table of the Lord, eat his body, drink his blood, and we'll sing a song of love. Hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah.
I heard that when I was like 6, but
so you went
it's like this is, if I may real quick, this is something I very much like about trads, because we all meet together, and what I've discovered is we all have a shared kind of musical PTSD of the church, of all the things, right? More than just the Wreckovation and everything. So someone will start up like sing to the mountains, sing to the seas, which is like my like remembrance one. And yeah, and Rudy's face says it all.
For me, it's all the Spanish ones. The Spanish ones are like the worst.
Oh gosh,
horrible.
They are. There's one Spanish one that goes to the tune of Red River Valley. And whenever I go to a Spanish mass and I hear that, no, it's got Spanish lyrics. I don't know what they are.
Those are the lyrics. La da da dee dee.
Well,
Del Señor. It's very important.
Del Señor.
Del Señor. Well, whenever I hear that, I sing the English lyrics. Come and sit by my side if you love me.
Oh no.
Do not hasten to bid me adieu, but remember the Red River Valley.
Oh my God.
And the cowboy who loved you so true.
Charles, when is your birthday? We'll have to sing happy birthday to you like Marilyn Monroe.
Oh, gosh.
Happy birthday.
That sounds like a Craig call. The heavy breathing. No heavy breathing, thank you. But it's November the 8th. The 60th anniversary of JFK's election.
Remember the 8th of November.
8th of November.
Kennedy treason and plot.
Well, we'll be sure to do that. And thank you so much for joining us today. Again, you can find Charles' work at Tumbler House website with tumblerhouse.com. I know that your books are also on Amazon.
Yep.
So that's perfectly acceptable.
And Tan has the last 2. Tan
has the last 2. Thank you. Also,
where's the best place to purchase it for you though?
Yeah,
Charles.
Just send it to. Well, I guess any books. Any books of mine that came from Tumbler House. Tumbler House is the best bunch to get them from. The others, the others I would recommend Tan. Amazon is a last resort.
Okay.
You hear that, people?
You hear that, people?
Sacrifice your convenience.
Your 2-day shipping.
Support Mr. Coulombe.
And remember, if you anything you order from Tumbler House, if your order is $25 or more, free shipping and handling.
That's easy, people. What are we doing? But not 2-day, but it's free. Don't worry.
It's easy math.
Free.
Yeah.
Void will prohibit it. Only while supplies last.
You have to say it faster, Charles.
Operators are standing by.
Thank you for joining us, Charles. Again, if you guys want to see also his video podcast that he does, please just go ahead and type in Tumbler House here on YouTube. That's TUMBLAR House. Very good long episodes, as well as a lot of short form highlighted content that's uber helpful about a ton of topics across the Catholic and cultural world. I see.
No CODs. No CODs.
No CODs.
No CODs.
Here, yeah, for the man himself. Please don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, share this video. We are growing. Last time we interviewed you, Charles, actually, we were just under 100 subs. So you helped us push us over the edge. So we're very grateful to you and for you coming on. We'll have to have you on extremely soon because there's so much more to talk about.
Yeah, we want to hear the Mahoney years.
Before the election.
Okay, we can do that. Well, looks like we'll look out
before
next
the
week.
Election.
Mm-hmm.
What kind of a world are we going to have afterwards? I don't know.
We want to make sure the internet still runs. So,
well, that's it. You see, I hate to get into reminiscence mode when we're breaking up, but just remember, Y2K.
I was 5.
I remember.
Yeah, you were 5, and you remember. To this day, when people ask me, like right now, are you ready for the election? Man, I'm still trying to get ready for Y2K. I don't know. I don't know what's happening. All right. Well, listen, guys, it's been great.
Yeah,
So,
Charles, that crown on your flag back there lines up perfectly on your head.
Oh, you like this?
Yep. And that's exactly what you are. You are a king. Thanks for coming onto the show with us.
Yes.
Well, you're very, very welcome. That, by the way, is the Royal Croatian flag.
Oh. We will do
under the Habsburgs.
I was gonna say I knew it would be Habsburgs related. I can see that. I see the, so thanks for coming on, Charles. We'll have you on extremely soon to kick up from all of us at the Glad Chad podcast too. God bless you and Mary keep you. We'll see you on the next one.
God bless you. Ciao, ciao.